A lot of familiar faces, and it makes me so happy to see the familiar faces. So it's great to be here with you all. We've got a really great lecture coming today. This is part of our lecture series named Doctor's Orders. So we do these. We haven't been as frequent as we wanted to, but we're going to try to become more frequent. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to tell you about our next lecture that's actually going to happen next week. So more on that later. But this morning we have two great people with us. One of them is one of our medical students, Jeff Goodwin. He's going to speak to us. He has a special interest in neurology and has worked in neurology clinics for quite a while. So he has some pretty good firsthand experience with a lot of these things. And then Darcy Chamberlain, she's my business partner. We love having her at the clinic, and she's going to talk to us today as well. At the end, we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So if you have a question, go ahead and write them down. And if you didn't grab a paper on the way in, there's a TYM, test your memory. And I'm going to call out one random person to review their memory test up here with me. No, I'm not going to do that. No. That was just a joke. Yeah. No, do it. If you have any questions about it, make sure you grab somebody and ask us about it. I'm going to give a little intro to Jeff. He's a second year medical student here at Rocky Vista. He worked in neurology prior to RVU for 7 years, where he served several roles, including a technologist performing nerve conduction studies and EEGs. He's currently the vice president of the neurology group here at the university as well. He's married to the love of his life. 7 years ago, they have a 2-year-old daughter. He enjoys pouring all the time he can outside of school to spend time with them, whether it be camping, hiking, fishing, or watching TV or a movie together. So he's going to be the first to speak to us. I'm going to give, and then I'll introduce Darcy after that.
All right. Let me grab the pointer here, or this thing's going to stay stagnant. Thank you so much for being here. If at any point the mic drops and you can't hear me, just let me know. Say we can't hear you. But as Dr. Harmon said, my name is Jeff, and I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to speak to all of you. Really grateful to Dr. Harmon and Darcy for letting me partner with them to give this discussion. I wanted to start this discussion off with a little bit of an immersive story. And so I want you all to look at this painting up here by Annie Penning and kind of immerse yourself into this lovely, wonderful garden that she has depicted here. And then let's meet Eleanor. Eleanor was an older woman that loved to garden. She had a very large, beautiful garden in her backyard. She had many pathways through this garden and lots of different plants. Eleanor worked in her garden every day to maintain it. And on the weekends, her daughter Annie would come and help her. Working in the garden together was something that they did throughout Annie's childhood and that they loved to do together. As she got older, Eleanor started to see some strange things happening in her garden. She started noticing that plants were growing in places that she hadn't put them, that her tools had started going missing in certain places, and that some pathways which had been clear started to become overgrown, and new pathways that she didn't recognize were forming. She thought, perhaps I just need to work harder. And so every day she went out in the garden and continued to work, even more than she did before. She asked for extra help from Annie on the weekends to come and restore her garden to just the way that it had been before. But as time went on, Annie found that her efforts weren't enough. The garden began to change. Natural plants that she hadn't put there started to grow. The pathways became unrecognizable, and Annie's frustration and confusion at what was happening with her garden grew. And so she thought to herself, I'm going to work even harder. And she went out to the far reaches of her garden one day. And to her frustration, she had to call her daughter because she got lost in her own garden. Things that were so familiar to her looked unrecognizable. And as Annie came and guided her mom back to the front porch, She looked out on her garden and she said, Annie, I'm so confused and frustrated. My garden just isn't what it used to be. Annie said, It's okay, Mom. I didn't love this garden because it was organized, neat, and perfect. And perfect, thank you. I loved this garden because of all the time we spent in it together. And then Eleanor started to cry. She said, Annie, it's my fault the garden isn't the way that it used to be. I don't remember things the way I used to. And I, just like my garden, have changed. But Annie said, Mom, it's okay. Because just like this garden, no matter how time and age changes you, you just have to be you because I love you. And that's enough. Why did I start with this story? Well, because as much as we like to study and treat disease in medicine, really what it comes down to is not the disease, but the people. That's the reason why we do medicine. And I wanted this story to serve as a reminder to me and to everybody here today that as we talk about Alzheimer's and dementia, to not forget the people, not to get lost in the trees and be unable to see the forest. And having said that, let's get into the trees. So, why talk about dementia? An understanding of dementia is crucial, not only for people who are having symptoms, but for people who are caregivers and even those who are just in the community at large. It has a significant impact on our community and on our nation. Let's talk about a few numbers to illustrate. 360 billion. This is the number of dollars that it took in the US healthcare expenditure in the year 2024 to care for those with dementia. That's a lot of money. It's about 8.4% of the entire US healthcare expenditure on 2% of the population. What's even more impressive, though, is the Alzheimer's Association's estimate that the unpaid labor that family and other caregivers and friends gave to people with dementia in the year 2024 was worth an additional $350 billion. So this number is almost nearly just half of what it really takes. But we're not here to talk about money. We're here to talk about people. In fact, 6.7 million of them. That's how many people are living with dementia currently in the United States. To put that into perspective, that's the entire population of Utah and Nevada combined, plus a little bit more. It's so many people, in fact, that if you lined them up, single file, shoulder to shoulder, and started in Los Angeles, you would reach New York. And finally, let's talk about the most important number. This is the number of people that Alzheimer's needs to affect to change your life. Now that we know why we're talking about dementia, let's talk about what dementia is. Dementia, first, I'm going to get into we're going to talk about cognitive function. We use our brains to do everything. We use it to move, we use it to talk, we use it to understand, we use it to express ourselves. But a specific group of things that we use it to do are called cognitive functions. And I've listed them here. Making, keeping, and recalling memories, the use of language in all of its forms, reading, writing, speaking, understanding, attention. This I would define as being able to understand what information is relevant or necessary to a given task and ignoring things that aren't. Navigation. This doesn't just have to do with where you are, but it also has to do with being able to understand distances, shapes, sizes, and a good example of that is looking at a door and saying, just visually, I can see that I'm too tall for that door, which in my case would mean that it's not meant for humans. And also problem solving. I would describe this simply to put it as being able to make and execute a plan. These are all our cognitive functions. When any one of these lessens, we call this cognitive impairment. But cognitive impairment isn't dementia. Rather, cognitive impairment that becomes severe enough to interfere with daily living tasks that keep you from living your life independently, that's when cognitive impairment becomes dementia. So it begs the question then, if dementia is simply a list of symptoms at a given severity, what causes it? Well, this is where Alzheimer's comes in. There's quite a few different causes of dementia, but the most common by far is Alzheimer's disease. In fact, 60 to 70% of cases of dementia are caused by Alzheimer's disease. To put that into perspective with the visual from earlier, if you drew a line through Chicago, everybody from Los Angeles to Chicago would represent those people who are living with dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And everybody from Chicago to New York would be from other causes of dementia. Well, what is Alzheimer's disease? I'm going to let Darcy go really into depth on that, but I'll give a brief explanation here. This protein, which is in the brain, it's malformed in Alzheimer's disease and starts to form groups outside of the brain cells. These groups of abnormal protein start to interfere with the connection between brain cells, and that connection is necessary for brain function. It also encourages the formation of this problematic protein, which is inside the brain cells. When these tangles of tau proteins happen inside of the brain cells, it becomes toxic and actually causes neuron death, brain cell death. With both of these two problems happening together, this explains how Alzheimer's causes dementia. It interferes with the brain's connection and it kills the brain cells, leading to severe cognitive impairment that we talked about. It also leads to the characteristic shrinking of the brain that we'll see later on MRI imaging. So now that we have a better understanding of what Alzheimer's is, what dementia is, and how they differ, let's talk about how does dementia present? What does it look like? Well, here I have to illustrate everybody's favorite middle-aged fish, Dory. Everybody knows that Dory has memory problems, right? But does Dory have dementia? The answer is no. And it's one of the reasons why I use Dory to make a distinct point, which is that dementia is an onset of new problems, things that had been previously established and well developed earlier in life that start to lessen. Whereas Dory, if you've seen the second movie, you would know, has had memory problems her whole life, even as a kid. So it looks like memory loss and trouble making new memories. But also, a few other ways that it presents. If all of us look at this picture, we would immediately notice and describe this beautiful, shiny ring. But if you have severe cognitive impairment due to dementia, you might not be able to come up with that simple vocabulary word ring. And instead, you might call this something like a finger circle Or another common one is calling a watch a hand clock. Another example that is common in behavioral emergencies with dementia is not knowing where you are or how you got there, as Mr. Travolta is illustrating for us here. This is a problem not only with the navigation, but also, if you recall, going back to attention, which is a part of those cognitive functions. Because not only is it about where you are in space, but paying attention to the steps you took to get there and making those memories. This next one can be particularly frustrating to those experiencing symptoms of dementia, as well as their caregivers. And that is trouble understanding differences in distances, shapes, and sizes. The reason why I say that this illustrates one of the more frustrating components of dementia for those experiencing it and taking care of those who live with it is because those living with dementia, severe dementia, wouldn't just think that that cube is a cylinder or a circle, they would know it. And because of that, they would expect it to go through and wouldn't understand why it doesn't for them. The next symptom that I'm going to go over has to do with judgment and indecision. Now, this is also a kind of a Dory situation in the sense that dementia isn't if somebody has always had poor judgment. Rather, it's that they've had good judgment and then it starts to lessen. And I'm not talking about judgment on things that might be subjective. I'm talking about simple things. One good example is if any of us were to see, likely, a postmarked letter sitting that had been dropped, sitting next to a post office box, what would you do? Well, most of us would do one of two things. We would either pick it up and put it in the post box because it's already stamped, or for those of us who are more cynical, we would leave it there because it's not my problem, right? But somebody who's living with dementia, even though it's just a two-step plan, would have no idea how to answer that question. And finally, we have personality changes. This is often something that the person living with these symptoms may not recognize, but that those who are uh, care- caregivers for them or the family members and friends might recognize first. This is not an exhaustive list of what dementia is going to look like for everyone. It can be different case by case, but this gives you an overall idea of how severe cognitive impairment is going to affect their life and show up. So let's talk about how dementia is diagnosed. Thankfully, thankfully for all of us, it's mostly this: talking to your doctor and getting some simple cognitive tests like the one you're taking right now. In fact, the American Academy of Neurology says that simple physical exam, as well as history taking, and then administration of one of these tests, is over 90% effective at diagnosing for the first time a true dementia. But on top of that, how do we find out what's causing the dementia, right? Because we talked about Alzheimer's and there's other causes of dementia. This is where your physician is going to need some help. And so they might order some imaging, like an MRI or a PET scan if they're really worried about trying to differentiate between certain causes of dementia. And sometimes they'll order a lumbar puncture to make sure that it's not being caused by something else. Here you can see the characteristic shrinking of the brain. You see there's a lot of black around this brain here. And then what this is demonstrating is here, right where that red dot is now, that part of the brain is really important for memory making. And if you go from the 0 to the fore, you see that there's a lot less brain right there in that area there. The PET scans, how those work, is that they are actually looking at the functional activity of the brain. So as you can see here, this brain is normal. It has a lot of activity throughout it. The red, all of that red, is high levels of activity. But in Alzheimer's disease, a lot of that red is missing. Next, I'm going to let Darcy take over to talk more about how these things are going to be treated, what are the risk factors, and all of that. But thank you so much for giving me your time to listen to me and enjoy what's coming next.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great. And again, if you have questions for Jeff, we'll take those at the end. Darcy is, I want to introduce her with some of the things that she's done. She got her APRN and earned her MSN FNP from Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions, and she will be soon completing her doctorate of nurse practitioner from the same place next month. Is that right? Very good. Awesome. Congratulations. She completed her clinical studies in remote areas of Utah and the Southwest. She worked as a nurse for 10 years in a public healthcare system serving the Native American population, serving in places like Navajo Mountain, Monument Valley, Montezuma Creek, and in Blanding. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to her.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you to Jeff for such a wonderful first introduction and brief description of dementia and Alzheimer's. So what we're going to do, first I'm going to tell you a couple little stories. So this is a story of Kay. Kay grew up in this area. She grew up in St. George. She lived here for 40 years. She never really did have a good sense of direction. But as she got older and as more and more development happened, she got more and more confused on the roads. One day, she was attending her grandson's baseball game, and it was out by the new Desert Color area down south of town. And she ended up 30 minutes later calling her family member saying, I don't know where I am. I think I'm in Mesquite. And she had gone all the way to Mesquite without, she must have realized it along the way. But is that a sign of dementia? Is that a sign? We'll talk more about that later. And then there's another story about Mary. So Mary always loved people. She was a fun-loving and kind person, showing love to everyone. And as she got older and a little more forgetful, one day she received a phone call and they talked to her for about 15 minutes. And at the end of the phone call, they said, I love you. And she said, oh, I love you too. Who is this? Is that dementia? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll understand a little more about dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So throughout this presentation, throughout my focus today, we're going to go through these things. We're going to talk a little bit more about protein on the brain, like Jeff mentioned. We'll talk about risk factors and how you can lower your risk. We'll also talk a little bit about diagnosis and treatment, going over some of the same information that Jeff did. Then we'll talk at the end about caregivers and a call to action to prevent and prepare in your own life. So how does Alzheimer's affect the brain? Jeff talked about this a little bit. See if you can remember what he said. There's two parts on this picture, a healthy brain and a brain with Alzheimer's disease. Can you see the differences? What is one major difference that you can see right away? More darkness. Has it shrunk a little bit? You can see that it has shrunk. Cell damage and loss of connections between neurons leads to that brain atrophy and shrinkage of the brain tissue. So proteins in the brain, the ones that we're going to talk about with Alzheimer's don't quite affect the brain the same way as proteins in other dementias. Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and vascular dementia. They're different forms, But for our purposes today, we're going to focus on Alzheimer's. So one of the signature signs that you'll see in a scan of a brain is red, yellow, green, blue, and dark in the image. You can see on the normal side, there is a healthy degree of red, there's yellow, there's green, and then the dark spots are minimal. The red, like Jeff was telling us, red is high vascular. There's a lot of activity going on in the red and the yellow. Green is more mid activity. Blue is very low density activity, and black is no activity. So you can see as it progresses to Alzheimer's disease, there is a lot more black. So the first protein that we talked about in that last slide was amyloid. So amyloid plaques form, and that's what kind of causes that. You can see that. This scan that we're looking at here shows tau tangles. Tau is another protein. It's an important factor of the brain. It provides structure and stability. But in Alzheimer's and in dementia, those proteins tangle up outside the neurons and they prevent proper communication between neurons. They form twisted tangles, and those tangles disrupt cell function, block nutrient transport, and eventually lead to neuron death. So what are some ways that you can think of just off the top of your head to maybe prevent some of these tau tangles and amyloid plaques forming in the brain? Nutrition, sleep, brain games. We've mentioned 3. I've got a couple more. Exercise. Social. Social is actually a really important one. So here we are looking at healthy brains. Yes, exercise, deep sleep, anti-inflammatory diet, stress management, social connections, which isn't listed there, but it is a big one. So we're going to go through those in a little more detail. So prevention strategies to reduce risk. Exercise stimulates brain growth. It's not just good for your muscles and your bones and your tendons and all that kind of stuff. It also helps strengthen a brain protecting protein. And that protein helps actually get rid of toxins in the brain. So coordination exercises can help you prevent falls, of course, but they also support cognitive function. So it's important to get, we recommend 150 minutes per week of moderate exercise, which turns out to be about 30 minutes a day. What about sleep? Does anybody here have any difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep or getting to deep sleep? It's a pretty common issue. And a lot of us don't really talk about it because we don't want to wear the masks on our face to sleep, right? But sleep is such an important thing, and we're going to have Dr. Harmon talk about that in a few minutes. The importance of sleep with brain health. So sleep clears toxins and it protects memory. Aim for 7 to 9 hours per night. Try to make sure you can get to that deep sleep. If there are sleep disorders, make sure you get treatment and get referrals to sleep medicine. This shows books that you can read that can help give you some tips. Say Goodnight to Insomnia and the Sleep Prescription. There are also sleep apps that you can use on your phone. Another important thing is the natural circadian rhythm that we have. And one of the best ways to improve your circadian rhythm is to get that morning sunlight. Next, of course, is the antioxidant diet to reduce inflammation and support brain function. There are a lot of diets out there. There are a lot of different things that you can do to lose weight and get healthy. Brain boosting diets include essential fatty acids. So you're going to have antioxidants. Originally, the DASH diet was a big one, and its main purpose is to prevent high blood pressure. So the DASH diet, then the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet, what do you think it is high in? Omega-3s. Yes? Yes. So the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet were both really good, healthy diets. And then they came up with, neurologists came up with or nutritionists, the MIND diet. So the MIND diet is a combination of Mediterranean and DASH diets. It is the Mediterranean DASH intervention to prevent or to intervention for neurodegenerative delays. That's the MIND diet. And it's its focus is leafy greens, not just fruits and vegetables, but leafy greens and berries, other antioxidant foods, particularly blueberries, fatty fish like salmon and sardines, and then those antioxidants and anti-inflammatory things that are neuroprotective, like turmeric and green tea and things like that. Avoiding entirely processed foods, red meats, fried foods, sugar, refined carbs, all those things that we already know are not good for our bodies, but now we know it's really important to follow a healthy diet for brain health. So another that we talked about is mental stimulation and brain games. You did a puzzle, you did kind of a memory game as you walked in. Learning new language skills is important for brain health. You read and write regularly. If you have a journal, if you have a diary, if you have a calendar, it will be a good memory trick to sit down for 5 to 10 minutes a day, write down what you remember about the day. Even if you just have one of those calendars with the big squares, write down a summary of your day. That's really good for brain health. Use it to write your story. Social engagement reduces dementia. You can join clubs, you can volunteer, stay connected to people. So social connections, we're going to go into that just a little bit deeper real quick. These are some ideas to help improve social connections. Have conversations. Conversations require you to think, remember, and process information. Spending time with family and friends and loved ones and support groups. This combats loneliness and depression, and it gives a sense of belonging, which actually boosts your brain health. Social connections provide motivation to improve your lifestyle, to make better choices. Time with animals is healthy for your brain. It increases blood flow to the brain. And sense of purpose. So on this, we have some organizations that are local that you can join to volunteer your time and your energy and help promote some of those connections. It gives you a sense of purpose and responsibility, and it keeps your brain engaged. So some people will do all of these strategies. They'll eat healthy and they'll live healthy. They'll have social connections and they will still get dementia. I don't know if any of you know anybody who's done all the right things and yet they're still having some cognitive decline. Some early signs and symptoms that you can look for are decreased judgment, difficulty doing familiar tasks, problems communicating, misplacing items, forgetfulness that affects their day-to-day function, difficulty planning or solving problems. So actually, as we're going through this, you can think of things maybe to exercise your brain. If there's difficulty planning or solving problems, one of the things that you can do for cognitive function is think of an event or something that you want to have happen and work it backwards as to what needs to happen first, what needs to happen before that. Working it backwards is kind of a reverse problem solving. Confusion of time and place, withdrawal from work or social activities, changes in personality, and changes in mood or behavior. So Jeff talked a little bit about how we diagnose this. There's clinical tests and there's imaging. A lot of times in primary care over at the clinic, what we'll do is we'll focus on the little cognitive tests that you can do. And every year you get an annual wellness exam and we do we call it the mini cog. You go down here. There's a whole list of cognitive tests that we can do. At the clinic, we do the mini cog. It's about 3 minutes long. You draw the clock, you remember 3 words, and that's it. That kind of gives us an idea. The one that we're going to do real quick, you can download this online and do it yourself. It's called a self-administered gerocognitive exam, or SAGE. You can download it, print it, take it at home. So here's an example. Let's just look through this. This one, draw a line from one circle to another, starting at 1, then going to A, then 2, then B, then 3, then C. Okay, everybody got that? I'm going to give you 20 seconds to do this in your mind. How did you do? You okay? Next, we're going to do this. You get 30 seconds to find 3 differences. Five more seconds. How did you do? Who got 3? Nice, nice. Who got 2? Nice. How many only got 1? Nice. Nice. All right. Who got 3? Raise it again. What are they? The guitar head, right? The sun smile is different. And what's the third? Is it a flower? No. What was it? You got it. It's the hand, the paw, the length of that black color on the hand. Hey, good job.
Dr. Harmon's officially demented. So I just want to let you all know I missed that one. I have somebody tell me they already knew that, so thank you.
These are exercises that you can do on your own to stimulate brain activity. So that's great. You did great. For treatment, before we really get into too much treatment, we've talked about lifestyle changes that can kind of help brain connections and the synapses and all that kind of stuff. There are 2 main medications. One is donepezil and the other is memantine. And to understand that, we're going to first talk about the 2 major neurotransmitters that they affect. One is glutamate. Glutamate is arguably the most important neurotransmitter, excitatory neurotransmitter. It plays a crucial role in learning, memory, mood regulation, cognitive functions, and motor control. In someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, there is too much glutamate. The doorways and the pathways are just open and the glutamate is flooding the area, and that kind of stuff is just going wild. The next one is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is another important neurotransmitter, plays a crucial role in movement, memory, heart regulation, attention, and motivation. This one is basically every breath you take and every move you make. In someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, there is not enough acetylcholine because there's a part of your brain that takes up the available acetylcholine and recycles it, and it happens too quickly, not enough acetylcholine is in the brain. So if we're going to treat these 2 things, there's too much glutamate and there's not enough acetylcholine, shouldn't we just flood the brain with acetylcholine and take out all the glutamate? What would that do? Leave you brain dead. So basically, there is very tight control in the brain with neurotransmitters, with proteins, with all this stuff, and it all functions beautifully together. Our bodies are absolutely wonderful. In dementia, though, those two things are a little off balance, and the brain isn't able to regulate them properly. So one of the treatments is donepezil. This does acetylcholine, kind of helps that choline esterase not take up as much acetylcholine, which can help with boosting memory, boosting thinking skills, helping with attention and daily activities, and it can slow the worsening of symptoms. These medications that we're going to talk about, they don't slow they don't stop the disease, but they can treat symptoms. So this is the acetylcholine, helping us have more of it. This next medication, where there's too much glutamate, this kind of helps the receptor antagonists. It works to block those receptors, improving memory, attention, daily functioning, reducing agitation and aggression. So again, these medications, if you find that the little cognitive tests that you're scoring low on those cognitive tests, then we would do some imaging. We would look at those pictures and see if there is a decline. And that's when you start these medications, because if you start these medications and there's not that cognitive or those neurotransmitter dysfunction, then it's going to cause agitation. It's going to cause jerky movements. It's going to cause tremors and things like that. We don't want that. So next, call to action, prevent and prepare. Small changes can have a big impact. So the early screening that we're doing, lifestyle modifications that we talked about, all of those good preventive things that can help stimulate your brain. One thing that we can do, if we know there is a strong family history of dementia, if we know it's coming, how can we prepare? There is one woman, she did a wonderful TED Talk. She talked about her father having Alzheimer's. He was a college professor. He loved writing op-eds. He loved playing chess. He was interactive. He loved people. He still got dementia. But as a person with dementia, people loved him because he was still kind. He still kept his mind busy. He loved to fill out forms. And so they provided him form after form after form, and he would fill out forms, and half the time they were wrong. But with someone with dementia, you don't really try to correct them. You just let them live in that world. So he still got the dementia, but he was loved. And she, as his daughter, said, I'm not a loving person. I don't like people, but to prepare, because it's very likely that I may have dementia or Alzheimer's, I'm working on becoming a better person so that when my brain function declines, people are still going to enjoy being around me. I'm going to work on skills where my hands can have muscle memory, doing puzzles, doing little crafts, crocheting, knitting, things like that, that will keep your hands busy, because a busy person is more happy. They're more entertained on themselves, and they're more they're helping those neurons that are still there. The other thing that you can do, let's see, so she did work on becoming a better person, and those hobbies, and now I'm having a dementia moment. But anyway, you can prepare. This is what it was. It was exercise and balance, because having the yoga, tai chi, things like that improve your balance can help you not have falls. And if you tend to wander a little bit, you don't want to add fractures and falls to that. So supporting caregivers, making sure that we are there for each other, that we recognize these signs in one another, that we help one another and provide that community support. Real quick, I have final takeaways. This is a 7-day starter plan. If you haven't been doing those things, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, work on a little bit at a time. And I really want to emphasize the importance of sleep. And so Dr. Harmon has some great insight on the importance of sleep and brain health.
Okay, I love talking about sleep, and a lot of what I've learned it comes from medicine, but there's also a really good book out there called Why We Sleep, written by Matt Walker, called Why We Sleep by Matt Walker. Fabulous book, really talks about a lot of the ins and outs. But one of the things that we don't realize is that at night, our brain is supposed to take all of the memories that we made through the day and consolidate them into something smaller. Meaning, like my drive into work, throw it away. What I ate for lunch, who cares? We don't need to remember these things unless there was something remarkable about it. But these interesting facts that we want to learn, these connections that we make, the skills that we learn, that we want to save for later. And so our brain tries to consolidate things, and if you are not sleeping through the regular sleep pattern or not sleeping enough, I envision it like I have a whiteboard and I'm making memories during the day and I'm writing them out on the whiteboard. And then at night, I'm taking each memory and erasing it off the whiteboard. And if I don't get the right kind of sleep that I need, I don't ever clear out the board for the next day. I don't get that cognitive rest to be able to create new memories. And so a lot of the research does support this. And so trying to figure out how to get the good sleep is really a key. And it's very common for people to have a hard time sleeping. And maybe just a couple of words on that. There's an old saying in medicine, and it talks about mental health. It oversimplifies it. I say it all the time. If you've heard it before, you're going to hear it again. It says, if you're anxious, you live in the future. If you're depressed, you live in the past. If you're at peace, you live in the present. And for us to sleep at night, we have to be present. And so when people come in, they say, "Oh, I'm having a tricky time sleeping." I'm always like, "Oh, so how long have you had anxiety?" And some people look at me and they're like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not an anxious person." And I say, when you're laying in bed, not sleeping, because that's what the problem is, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about how nice the sheets are? How dark the room is? How nice it is to just be in this bed that's just like a first world bed? Probably not, right? You're trying to like run through all the things you have to do tomorrow. You're running through all the problems. Your brain is somewhere else. And a lot of times people will tell me, I read a book, turn a fan on, I have some white noise, I'll watch an old rerun, and then I fall right asleep. When you do this, it's distracting your brain to be more present so that you can go to sleep. And these people that just like jump in bed and they're gone in a second, all of them will tell you the same thing. They don't care if the house burns down, if the world doesn't exist tomorrow. Their goal is to just sleep, and tomorrow they'll worry about it. They have no care in the world. They're on vacation. And that is like a key part of what getting good sleep is like. One other thought, in Matt Walker's book, he talks about these circadian rhythms that Darcy was talking about. And one of the things that he points out, and I don't know if there's anybody in this room that would fall in that category, but sometimes people wake up early as they age. Some people start their day at like 3, 4 in the morning. Like, I'm headed outside. And in the summertime, 3 or 4 in the morning, you get some sunlight. As your eyes are exposed to the sunlight that early, your circadian rhythm is changing. And it's kind of interesting because now you get in this like really weird fluctuation where you get a lot of light and it starts really early and you need to go to bed. Well, I've been up since 3, so I need to go to bed at like 7 o'clock, but I can't because it's too bright. And so one of the things he says is actually keeping the curtains closed until it's later in the morning. So there's a lot of clever things that you can do to help with sleep, but it really is critical for brain function. I'm convinced it's one of the most important things that you need. I told my wife a long time ago, there's 3 things I don't like: being cold, being hungry, being tired. And that's why I'm not a surgeon, because those 3 things is a surgeon's life. But sleep really is truly a critical thing for our brain to be able to operate the way that it needs to.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darcy.
Yeah.
That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you all for coming. We probably got like 6 minutes for questions, 5, 6 minutes. Does anybody have a question for someone? And you can direct it to someone or just throw it to the group. Yeah, go ahead. That's a really great question. And it probably is. It interferes with, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the question was, what if I'm taking something to help me sleep and so I'm asleep at night? Does it interfere with my sleep architecture? Because that's what we're worried about. The brain has this plan that it should go through at night. The answer is probably yes, that it is interfering with the sleep architecture. So I don't look at things as like good or bad. but there's always a spectrum of things. If medicine has taught me one thing, there's a spectrum. Best is natural sleep. Second best is like getting some sleep. Worst is like not getting the sleep. So even though sleep medicines are not perfect, they're probably better than sleep deprivation. Good question. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Why we sleep. Matt Walker. Other questions? Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Darcy. Jeff, that's you. Go ahead, Darcy. If you I can chime in a little bit as well, but did you
So for the medications for those two things that we talked about, I would actually have to look that up because what
Yeah,
do you
so
know
good
on that?
question. Yeah, and really the most common side effect for all drugs is like headache, stomach upset, but what we're worried about is it causing worsening agitation. A lot of times with these medications, there are other like severe side effects. You're going to read those on everything, but oftentimes they're very benign, but they don't necessarily help a lot. And the one of the things that I remember learning about them is they will help you score higher on a memory test, but your family won't be able to tell you that it's actually working. And so these medications, while they don't have really severe side effects, they don't have amazing benefits to them. But a lot of times we say, is it worth taking another pill or and hoping that it will help and maybe it will? Or do we want to have less pills and less like distance ourselves a little bit more from interventions? And so that's really what it comes down to. Did that answer your question? More specific question? I don't have them all memorized either. I couldn't give you the list. It's too long. Yeah, you can have people that have psychosis and different things like that. And again, nobody knows if that's really going to happen or not. The thing that's really in my mind when I think about it, if I'm going to take a medication, I want to have the benefit outweigh the risk. And in that one, it's probably a coin toss because your family can't even tell if you're on the medicine or not. They can't tell you're functioning any better. And as Darcy pointed out, it isn't about preventing, it's about delaying. And so that, like on the, I believe it was on the donepezil, it delays symptoms by 6 to 12 months. It doesn't stop it at all. And that's one of the most frustrating things. That's why y'all are here. You're hoping we have some magic bullet that we can tell you that this will fix memory loss. This will fix Alzheimer's or dementia. And we don't see it. There's new stuff coming down, but it's very preliminary and we don't know enough about it yet. Are you talking about the new IV infusion? Oh, okay. There's a new IV infusion, and it has some real serious side effects that are actually pretty common. Like 30% of people getting them, where it could be like fatal or hospitalize them. But that may have some benefits down the road. I don't think we're right there yet, though. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, this is like my favorite is my grandma that didn't believe she had dementia until the neighbors found her down, and then we said, "Grandma, you're going." Um, and the best part about my grandma, I'm going to give this as another example because it talks about human behavior. My grandma tells us this story about when she took away her dad's keys, how mad he was. He was so mad at him for taking his keys away, and that they just still had to do it. 3 minutes later, we have the conversation with her. Grandma, we're taking your keys away. What was her response? Mad as a hornet. So when you get your keys taken away, the appropriate response is be mad as a hornet. 2 weeks later, forget it ever happened, right? So when you have these situations where you're doing the transition, sometimes you just have to be the parent and say, well, what would you have done for yourself if you didn't have the memory problem? And that's an important thing. That's an important thing that we need to do is realize as you're making a decision for somebody else, it's not making the decision that they would do that moment. It's back when they were able to make a good decision for themselves. How would they have done things? And it's really challenging because sometimes you just have to be the person that's in charge, and that's life doesn't prepare you for that. Yeah, in the back. I love that. Yeah, yeah. Disconnect the battery. I love that. That's good. I don't know, Mom. I don't know why it doesn't work. I don't know. The car god said no driving. I don't know what it is. Yes, go ahead and. So I don't know, but I'm going to tell you something really fascinating from that book. When people drink a lot of alcohol and then they stop, they have the DTs, the delirium tremens, and they start hallucinating while they're awake. And one of the hypothesized things is this: when I drink alcohol, it ruins my sleep architecture. And I can go, if I'm a good alcoholic, I've ruined my sleep architecture for years, maybe decades. And then when I stop, my brain can start getting REM sleep again. And it may be that the DTs are REM sleep while you're awake. And that's why you see like elephants and like snakes and monkeys out in the parking lot and things, because your brain is so starved for that REM sleep, it's trying to catch up. So my guess would be if you do start sleeping well, it's only going to be beneficial for you. The very back. We'll come back to your question. Oh yeah. I would have to look it up to see what the most current data is, but I would tell you if you're chasing that game, you're better off just exercising, right? Like sometimes it's like, don't ever cook with aluminum, right? This sells newspapers all day long, really sexy. No, everybody's afraid, fear tactics. But in all reality, sometimes you have to think it's not what I'm not doing, it's what I am doing. Three things prevent dementia. Darcy mentioned them: socialize, exercise, cognitive exercise. Those three things over and over have been shown to do that, to be very, very helpful. Don't start smoking too. That's a good one. Or if you are, stop. Good. Did you have a follow-up question, Gwen? Hearing? Yeah. Yeah, if you can't hear, it's really hard to socialize. There's many stories of people laughing inappropriately or like laughing at off-color jokes, and everyone's like, "Whoa, why are you laughing?" And they're like, "I can't hear anything." So if you can fix your hearing, that really will go a long way to help with your brain. If you were to think about it, your brain works because you're exercising it and you're creating those pathways over and over again. If you knock out the hearing, you knock out a lot of what the brain can accomplish. So fixing your hearing is really important. I wish hearing aids were better. I think in the next 5 years they'll get better because they're no longer FDA regulated. But I think that that's very important. I think we have time for three more questions right here. I don't know of any. Jeff?
There is one. It's called Memory Matters, and it's in here. It's not in Ivans. It's in St. George though. So it's close by, and they're a really great group.
Thanks, Jeff. Does somebody else know one out there? So caregivers that are dealing with family members with memory loss. And where's the meeting? Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. Okay, one more question.
Like how does our brain get to choose which memory to keep if you're in dementia?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Like how does our brain get to choose which memory to keep?
Yeah, the question was, how does our brain choose which memories to keep? That's a real, I think that there's probably a really complex, cool way of somebody saying like, well, if you get 50% dopamine and something else, then you'll make the memory. I don't know if that's really but I think to myself, there are plenty of people that have been through traumatic things. They don't want the memory anymore and they can't get rid of it. My guess is that when you make a memory, you're looking for something that is important to you that you either want to do again or do not want to do again. And that's why sometimes these like negative memories are so strong because they put you in a situation where you're emotionally vulnerable, physically vulnerable, whatever it is, and you don't ever want to do that again. And so it's this memory so that it never happens again. Versus some of the other ones where if it was something good that you like, that would keep driving you to do those things. And that probably has a real strong play with like dopamine and different things like that. Great. One last question. Yeah. Yeah, good point. So memories almost seem to work in reverse. So two things on that. Number one, dementia means you have to be mented. When I start out, when I'm born, not mented, I ment myself, I will dement myself. And the memories probably don't work backwards, they work strongest or weakest to strongest. So I will forget who I met at the store. Then I will forget my new neighbor. Then I will forget other people along the way. The last two people I think that are on my list is my wife and my mom. If I can't tell you who my wife is or my mom is, done. We are done making memories ever again, and there's nothing else to lose, right? And so the stronger these memories are, that's where word games and things like that come into play, because you're constantly performing the same thing over and over and making those neural pathways really strong. Thank you guys so much for your questions. We are out of time. I'm so sorry. I wish we could take more. If you have any more questions, could you click to the last slide, please? Next week, it's going to be a Zoom doctor's orders. If you want, you can take a picture of turn your camera on, put it at the QR code, and that will take you to where to sign up for the Zoom conference, but it'll be a remote one. We have someone in Colorado participating and somebody here participating, and it's talking about long COVID. Ooh. Thank you all so much for coming. It's great to be here in the community. Love you all. Have a good afternoon.